Amazing. So welcome everyone to this new Sounds Like Sustainability webinar in a series of webinars where we have a conversation around sustainability. We try to talk about what sustainability is and what it potentially isn't. We try to tackle out a couple of critical moments and critical aspects and perspectives on sustainability. And today I have another wonderful guest here, Yvonne Love, and you will get the chance to introduce yourself, and we will talk about your work and your passion and your role as an artist and your role as an academic. And we will talk about sustainability, but due to the fact that this webinar always is labeled or entitled as Sounds Like Sustainability, I would like to start with talking about a sound. And therefore, I would like to ask you, Yvonne, if you kind of listen, if we are quiet, if we're all quiet for a moment, if everyone just listens, and maybe we identify a sound, any kind of sound or sound bit that makes us think about sustainability. Is there anything in your surrounding at the moment, Yvonne, that has a specific sound, or that is anything that would trigger an association of sustainability?
Yeah, so they're mowing the lawn outside of my house right now. But my dog is sleeping next to me and he's snoring. So I'm trying to focus on his snoring and not listening to the sound of the lawnmowers, which are fueled by fossil fuels at the moment. So I think about sustainability, often feeling guilty about how I live my life. And, the choices that I've made and living in a house that has grass outside, and in a community that restricts what I'm allowed to do. I would love to be able to remove the lawn and make it more natural. So that's my thought at the moment, but trying to not feel guilty and listen to my dog snore instead.
I'm very happy to talk about this feeling of guilt a bit later. If you try to focus on your dog snoring, and if this is something that you also relate to sustainability, can you just briefly share your definition of sustainability with us? So what is sustainability, if these are the two kind of sounds that you're reminded of?
Yeah, I think, a lot of how I think about things were shaped by my father, who is a naturalist, and he was always talking about zero population growth as sort of a main driver. I grew up taking a shower with a bucket in the shower, and we flushed the toilet. Part of it is that my father is also very conservative with spending. So he's always trying to save money. In the winter, the heat wouldn't be over 58 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we wore sweaters and had lots of blankets on the bed. So I grew up with that mindset of always checking yourself and trying to make the least amount of footprint as possible. And that is also like not buying a lot of new things and keeping a car until it gives up. So that dynamic is constantly in my head about trying to make things last and using less. How much less can we use?
That is a great aspect. Where are you now? Can you tell us a bit about your work and kind of how did this upbringing and these experiences from your childhood, how did this make you the person and the artist and the academic that you are at the moment?
I think it definitely had a really big influence. And I'm actually doing, for the past few years, I've been interviewing, my dad's 84, and he kept a bird list every day. He goes birding every day. He's also into butterflies and things too. But he has like the original Audubon field list for the area that he has Xeroxed. And so that's this old list, but he's used the exact same list every day for the last 50 years. And so he has these binders with these stacks. So I've been sitting with him and having him like open to a page, and he has notes. So he'll say, you know, where he was, like what the temperature was, whatever, who he ran into. And then he'll say, oh yeah, that was like the day that we were with Fred Mears and he showed us where the long-eared owls were in the White Pines. So there's always sort of like an anecdote. So I'm going back through with him. So that's sort of entering my work now. I think when I was growing up too, he would drag me out of bed at 3 a.m. so that we could be at sunrise wherever. And, you know, quizzing me on, well, what bird is it? Well, how do you know? What's the call? You know, what's the food host that it's on? So I was never able to just say it's a purple finch. How did you know it wasn't a house finch? So I think that that's really shaped, you know, kind of the questioning and critiquing of my own work and how I think about things. So that's sort of like a huge part of it. But now, my work used to be very personal. I had a sister who died from leukemia, and we think from chemical dumping at a Naval Air Force base that we lived across the street from. There was a cancer cluster there. This is before the EPA, just before the EPA comes in, and eventually that area was declared a Superfund site and still is today. And the drinking water is brought in from another place. But my early work was a lot focused on loss and the loss of my sister. And also my sister used to collect butterflies with my dad. She was like really into hiking. I was always like wanting to just sit at home and make stuff. But I kind of took a little bit of a role after she passed and really spent a lot of time like with my dad where he liked to be. So there was a lot of really personal loss kinds of things in my very early work, which dealt with like blood cells, which you can kind of see a little bit of cellular structures in my work behind me. But that shifted over the years and has really been about the Anthropocene and really about what we've done and how we have affected the environment. So it's definitely a more universal and really pulling on the knowledge base that I have in the natural world and looking at and using metaphorically sedimentary buildups like alluvial plain is a series that I've been working on. But now I'm pulling back in and trying to figure out ways that to incorporate some of those interviews with my father. So it is an ethnography, but it's also like a really personal space. So I'm kind of pulling back to that personal space after a long time of looking at science. And so looking at back to sort of a more inner space after like trying to understand the science behind a lot of the different things that I've been experiencing.
Mm-hmm. So maybe just for everyone who's in the call, maybe you want to give us some background in like how do you work and where do you work at the moment? So how do you bridge or I don't know, combine the role as an artist and the role as a teacher, as someone who then kind of researches but by the same time translate those things for students?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my role, so I teach sculpture, but I also have developed a 3-pointed course on climate change. So I worked with a colleague who's a social psychologist and a colleague that's a biologist. And so students can take they are required to take sort of an interdisciplinary kind of matchup. So they're all called climate change, but mine's arts, agency, and activism. And then there's biology and so the social psychology pieces. So the students get like a wide idea of a theme or a topic. So I have actually directly been able to bring in my concerns about climate change to the general education population at our school, which has been great. But the way that I work with students, even in that class, is really about helping students bridge and connect to their own ideas and really learning how to find their own voice, especially for the art majors. So it's not really about me as much It's not like a top-down teaching way of working. So I have to first get them comfortable because they're not really comfortable with like me letting them loose. So I give them some things and we really talk about, you know, the elements and principles of design and the basics and how those can communicate emotional constructs or ideas that they have. So I do a lot of journaling with them, a lot of writing. We go through their writing and pull out things that, you know, are interesting to them. And I help them figure out how to make things based on their areas of interest using my area of interest as a model.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what so I wanted to talk about this maybe a bit later, but just because you said so, and you described your role in such a beautiful way, I would love to stick with this because I think as teachers, as educators that we are, I think we do play a very important role in terms of agency building. So it's not us who hold the agency to then top down deliver content and tell the students what they need to know. But my feeling is it's just much more about facilitating the conversations and facilitating the communication processes and the learning. What you said by just offering the students the space where they can communicate and they can kind of create their own ideas, that is really beautiful. And I think, and this is then probably the question that comes out of that, how is this easier to do this creative work, talking, communicating, having those conversations and stimulating people to get their own ideas? Is it easier to do this in an art space than probably compared to other areas where it's more about scientific facts or more about theories and models? It's maybe a question that might be picked up later in the discussion again, but it's something that always kind of spins around in my mind.
Yeah, so I think probably it is. You know, I've been to, you know, we have to do tons of like diversity, equity and inclusion kind of workshops. And often the suggestions are to not teach so much through lecture and seeing about different ways that you can break down your class. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what I do every day. I'm really fortunate to have small classes, usually like 12. And my, you know, the studio class is also 6 hours long. And I'm not training students to go to medical school. Now, maybe I do sometimes have students that go to medical school, but I'm not responsible for them learning physiology in a specific way. And so I am able to develop my projects in ways that I think are important. So, I mean, I do things like I literally have a project for my foundation level course where they take a loaf of bread and have to make a sculpture with it. And we break down what we think of as a sculpture material. And we look at the properties of the bread. So we do a whole thing that's just experimenting on what the bread can be and can do and how then we can describe those qualities. And once they describe the qualities, they pick two, juxtapose them together, and their piece has to be toast bitten, so it's toasted and bitten, or chewed, or so they're not making an object, they're making the words that they've associated with the qualities that are the material. So I teach them really sort of in that a deep dive into how to come up with what the material is. So like in my work, especially when I'm dealing with environmental issues, the materials have to relate to what I'm making. So I may use carbon, for example, you know, if I'm drawing or something, so that it's specific to what I'm making. I'm not a painter, so I don't make the illusion of something. I am making the thing that's of the thing. So
that's an interesting perspective. On the difference between sculptures and those objects and the material itself and the experiences with the material compared to a painting. I love that. What I also, in environmental communication in this context, we often talk about two different things. One is the so-called ethical duty that we have as teachers in the field of environmental or sustainability communication. And the second thing is this notion of, or this idea of human nature relationships and how different they can be, and how they are represented, and what is it that we teach the students, what kind of human nature relationship is it that is present in how we teach and what we teach. And so this would be my question, like, what kind of human nature relationship, or how would you describe the human nature relationship that you want to establish or manifest or bring to life in your teaching?
I think that if you had asked me this question, I just got my 25-year chair at Penn State, so I've been teaching a long time. My answer would have been very different 25 years ago, and certainly different after the pandemic. We're seeing a lot of students I teach at a branch campus outside of Philadelphia, and most of our students receive, they live under the poverty level. So they receive a lot of government funding and that sort of thing to attend school. So the population that I teach was pretty greatly affected by the pandemic. But as you might imagine, young people, you're teaching them yourself. There was a lot of trauma, and especially in the United States, we had a lot of really difficult things happen during the pandemic that they unfortunately got to hyper focus on because they weren't leaving their houses. I think that I am now teaching with a greater sense of generosity towards my students and kindness. That is, before I would have said, well, they've got to learn, how to do this and how to do this. And I was really leading with the content of what I wanted to accomplish with them. And that has shifted to a space of meeting them with what I perceive as different needs. And some of those needs are just more support, more listening. So that's kind of where I am right now in my teaching, which is really listening to them and what their needs are.
I love that, because I think, isn't this part of a more human perspective on sustainability, to focus on kindness and care?
Yeah.
Do you think that sustainability is communicated, or let's start with a broader perspective, like, where do you think sustainability is communicated the most? Like, if we look around, like, where sustainability used as a claim or as a notion, and where is it used and abused in communication?
Do you mean are you talking about academia specifically?
No, probably a bit broader now, just to look at sustainability again, because I think this is something I try to do with these conversations here, to kind of see if sustainability, if it's actually a notion of care for resources and kindness, is this actually how sustainability is communicated outside, or is it probably different? So if we kind of open up our perspective and not just focus on academia or how we teach it or how we represent it and live it in our teaching, where do you see sustainability communicated in a way that it's about kindness and care, and maybe it's somewhere it's communicated or in a very different way?
So I think I don't know if this will answer the question in the way that you were expecting, but I think I'm also guilty of surrounding myself with like-minded individuals. And so we're listening to the same, news sources, and, have an elevated awareness of ways in which we need to be sustainable and in which industry is driving non-sustainable practices. Unfortunately, I also come out of the 70s generation that the industry and media focused on recycling as a way to, that's not really sustainability, but I think that a lot of people coming out of my generation and even subsequent generations, if you talk about sustainability, and in fact in my climate change class, the first thing that they'll say is, great, we're going to do a project on recycling. And I'm like, well, that's lovely, but let's look at a few other things here first. So I think that we're still, dealing with the ramifications of this sort of 70s culture on the industry blaming the individuals for the issues that we have around us. So I'm kind of aware of that too, and trying to navigate through that, but with more generosity and kindness, because a few years ago I would have been like, come on, and so instead of like challenging them in a negative way, I try to pull them in a more positive way, and actually don't ask that question at the beginning of my classes, but wait until later after we've talked a little bit more about how climate change, for example, has affected them personally. And I do have a wide international group of students. So I'll have students from places like Bangladesh who will talk about, flooding and not being able to live in places where they had lived before. So I get them a little bit more involved and personally connected to how things have affected them before bringing in that question about things that we could do. And I think I've avoided the recycling response, but.
Mm-hmm. And there was a workshop at the past IECA conference that was exactly about the climate change in my neighborhood, in my locality, and effects on that. Were there any learnings from that workshop, any insights that you would like to share that are maybe very similar to the experiences you make in the classroom, or maybe different?
I think that workshop ended up sort of shifting gears, which was great. And so we had people, again, it was an international conference, so we had people from all over the world, and they brought an idea of gaming. We started kind of with a game idea, but they really pushed it. So they had, their takeaways were games that they kind of were developing that they could use with their students to talk about sustainability, which I thought was really interesting. I don't think that we had any new ideas on how to become more sustainable. And I'll go back to my dad, who, his other famous quote is to decrease surplus population. So that's a Scrooge quote, right? So, and going back to 0% population, most of the issues I think that we have are because there's too many people on the planet. So a lot of strategies that we might come up with would all work a lot better if there were just simply less people.
Yeah, I know there. I listened to a couple of podcasts around that, and it's always it's a bit challenging and critical for me because we have 4 kids, so I feel like very guilty.
Yeah.
Going back to the guilt aspect, and it's. I think what is reflected in this example is something that is very inherent and very typical for the sustainability discourse, that on the one hand, there's a rational level of kind of understanding and being taught a lot of things, and there's a lot of communication meanwhile that teaches us and tells us, at least in kind of our contexts or countries. But by the same time, there's still kind of those many individual decision-making processes that we go through every day, where feelings like guilt, it's not just the lawnmower, it's having 4 kids, it's so many other things, when you buy food, when you choose your means of transportation, and if you travel to a conference to talk about sustainability with plane, and you go to Toronto, you go to wherever, there are a lot of very inherent conflicts to our life. Is there anything that are there any recommendations or anything, any strategies that you develop yourself in dealing with this feeling of guilt, or in dealing with those dissonances that always come by or appear?
Well, I think, my guilt is wide ranging on a lot of things that you mentioned. I have 2 children myself. And I've read so many different books on different things. my husband and I have been vegetarian, here and there, and then you rely on almonds or something that's not really sustainable and using way too much water. And again, it's just like anytime you think that I think that the main thing I could say is that we have to do everything in moderation, because if we jump all in and just are eating soybeans, well, they have to clear grounds to grow the soybeans just as much as they have to clear grounds for cows to graze, or and so challenging ourselves to eat locally is probably better than necessarily eating a primarily vegetarian diet, which I do. But just looking at all of our usages and just trying, I mean, even making art, it's like, some of my materials are toxic. Some of them use fossil fuels. I can't make work without stuff. So what is the stuff going to be that I'm going to make the work with? So, I've researched areas in being more green in the studio. It's really hard. I mean, it's hard to be a person on the planet. And I've had friends that have kind of, lived on communes and kind of dropped out of what we would consider to be a more normal society, and, tried to really live off the land more and never buy new clothing, or I mean, there's so many things that we can each do, but again, that's putting a lot of it on the individual, and industry is driving a lot of the pollution that we see in our environments. Yes, we do purchase some of the products that they make, but maybe things need to be more expensive so that we, have more sustainable products. Yeah, so I guess the thing I would lead with is moderation. To not jump into any one thing, full force, because then, if soybean is your thing, you're going to be clearing fields to grow the soybeans. So it just all becomes really tricky.
Last question from my side, and then I hand over to everyone else who's here today. You mentioned something at the beginning when it was a bit about your own role in academia and art, that kind of partly from your upbringing and the situations you've been in. One thing that you find important is to constantly question things, to critique, or at least, put it into question. Is this something that contradicts moderation, or is this something that kind of goes hand in hand?
Well, within myself, I guess it goes hand in hand. I think I'm constantly in this, angstful kind of force back and forth. And so I can tell myself, yeah, you can do it in moderation, then I'm doing something, and then I might feel guilty about a material that I just used in the studio, or firing stuff because I'm using fossil fuels to do that. So, I do think I live somewhat moderate. I think I can always do better. And I think that questioning is key in what I do in my artwork. It's key in, every day checking myself, what things could I do better today? Trying to not overwhelm myself by what could I do better in a lifetime, and just kind of taking it day by day.
Thank you so much from my side. Any questions, any ideas, anything to share from everyone else who's here?
If I may?
Yes.
Hi. Hi, thanks for the interesting talk. Just briefly, I participate from Austria here. I'm also into teaching, and I teach journalism basically at the University of Applied Science. And I'm just about to start a course on sustainability communication and climate journalism. So I'm very interested in your experiences in teaching actually climate-related stuff from different perspectives. And I'm especially interested in like a sort of like an inter or transdisciplinary approach, if you want. So coming from different perspectives, activism, art, and science, maybe. And my question, first one, I guess, would be, what are your experiences in teaching? What are good strategies in raising awareness for the issue, first of all? Because everybody knows, of course, about climate change, but what are your experiences in giving input so it makes a sort of like a shift in activities in students, so they do more than understand, maybe, or they get interested in getting active? how to activate, so to speak.
Well, so for the interdisciplinary piece, I invite my colleagues in to speak because I'm not an expert on climate change. I'm not an expert in the biological effects, and I'm certainly not an expert in the social science area. So we enter into each other's classrooms and do talks. But I lead with the students as researchers. So how I shaped my course, first of all, I find out what they know about climate change, and half of the class will be there because they've already taken one of the other two classes, or they're really passionate about climate change, not art, but climate change. They're really passionate about it. And I have other students that don't know anything about it, nothing. And so it's a combination of the two. So I have to figure out who the students are for that semester and then get them all, to a certain space. And because I'm doing art, I'm not doing the biology, which may focus on flora, fauna, that sort of thing. I have them tell me what their interest is, what is their concern. So like this, I just started this semester a week ago, and so I have all those concerns. And so, some students it's temperature rise, some students it was wildfires. And so I have a really good range of topics, and they are the researchers. In the beginning, they're doing their own work. The first project they do is they have to make a postage stamp about a flagship concern rather than a flagship species. And we do a whole bunch of research on their climate concern. So it starts with their concern, and that's what ends up on the postage stamp. They have to listen to each other because by the midpoint of the semester, I split them into groups, and the groups are usually around a common climate concern. And they do group projects, but they're researching and they are sharing their research with the class. So I'm never actually teaching about climate change. I'm never actually introducing, and I introduce different ideas through videos like of other artists who are working on climate change issues so they can see how artists talk about it. And then we use those as models for them to do their work. So that's kind of how I organize it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, can I continue from here? Hello, Francisca. Yeah, nice to see you after so long. Yeah. I like your thought, Yvonne, very much about moderation, and I want to bring here an example, and a question will come out of this. I'm currently a member of the academic staff at the University of Roehampton in London, in the business school there. And I'm also part of the Roehampton Climate Network, which is an initiative to embed concepts of sustainability and climate change into everything that we do and teach. Now, we ran a series of focus group with our students just after the COVID period. And one of the things we are very interested about was that how in their mind would the issues of COVID and climate change connect or disconnect. One of the very interesting things that came up, and this is the observation I would make, is that their experience about COVID was around moderation. They had to sit at home. They couldn't go out as much as they would have liked. They couldn't consume as much as they would have liked. They couldn't socialize as much. They discovered the neighborhood. They discovered how good it is to spend quality time with family, with friends. They recycled their things, recycled old hobbies, actually, picked up old hobbies, and so on, and so on, and so on. Very interesting. And then the discussion went on. And the next question is, in what way or another could be this implemented into tackling climate change on an individual level? And here the question came up, and this is what I would like to convey to you as well. Some of this, or actually most of the participants claim that unless there is a very clear external pressure, it is very difficult for yourself as an individual to take in all the initiatives and, be start things on your own, and in a way sometimes swim against the tide, and so on and so on. And they said that at the COVID period, there was a clear external pressure. There were strong government interventions, there were clear limitations and so on. You could do nothing about those. But in climate change, they don't feel that there is such a pressure. Yes, they do see, the wildfires and weather extremes and droughts and all this that comes with it. But without a firm external pressure, they said that they will not embark on the same journey as they did with the COVID period. What do you think about this, Yvonne? What's your insight?
So I would say something that's really important is experience. So the students that I had that were from Bangladesh, they experienced firsthand how climate change affected where they lived. And the pandemic, we experienced it. So when the students aren't living in an area where their home got burned down by the wildfires, or they're not, I don't know if you're following the news here, but in Florida, a giant hurricane has just hit the coast.
Right.
So, if they haven't experienced extreme weather, if they haven't lost things, if their life didn't change by experiencing some of these things, it feels distant. So, how do you bring them into the experience? So one of the things that I had thought about with the class, and I had mentioned the flagship species postage stamp, because we talked about flagship species and how we connect to them emotionally, right? The polar bear is beautiful. And so it's something that we do with art is to experience things on an emotional level. That's what we can offer in the arts. And so trying to help them connect emotionally and finding the thing that's important to them in there is key. I think that's where you were kind of going with this. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. But just one more thing to this, because you spoke also about the importance of everyday decisions, that you need to make choices every day. And how do you make that choice and that option, which actually works towards, sustainability and so on. So what would be your message to students here? How can we get them to make the wise choices on a day-to-day basis? Let's face it, there are many distractions to making the wise choice all the time.
Yeah, so I have a 25-year-old and a 22-year-old. My 22-year-old is just entering his senior year of college. And so I own those kids that I'm trying to motivate to think about these things. And, their life is just not about that right now. I mean, I think when I was their age, I was a little bit more politically active, and maybe because I have a very strong and opinionated voice in the House, they're sort of on the other side of things. So it's a really good question, because, the kids, they don't, watch I know we have one younger person in the room, but they don't get their news from the same kind of news sources that we do, right? They've never read a newspaper. And my younger son does question everything. He has the questioning mind for sure. And he's like, Mom, turn that news off. What is that? That's not even news. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you got me on that. I was watching MSNBC instead of, BBC would be a little bit better at least. But yeah, so they don't get their news from the same places. They get their information from very different places, and they are a generation that's grown up on entertainment and being entertained. It's a very different group of at least in the United States, a very different group of students, a different group of people, and especially after the pandemic, we have a lot of engagement issues. And how to re-engage the students. So again, I guess the only thing I could recommend, because I struggle with it sometimes with students myself, is, getting them engaged in something that affects them. How do they relate to something? I think here in the United States, like farmers, they tend to be really conservative and tend to vote conservatively, which is always surprising to me. And they don't want to talk about climate change. But if you start to talk about actually climate and how it's affecting their yield and their crops, then they're all about it. And then they're open to talking about it. So, not leading, and I am very guilty of this, so I have to really watch how I speak to people, not leading with certain terminology and again, listening to somebody else and hearing how they talk about things and hearing what their concerns are. You can have the conversation without using some of the language that we might use.
But this is a really tricky
Thank you.
one, because on the one hand we have this ethical duty, like we have to, there is a certain kind of duty or mission for everyone who teaches environmental or sustainability communication, or certain aspects of that, or climate change communication, or anything in that space. But by the same time, as you just said, it's really a challenge to not then be on a mission and then come up with like your own kind of statements, rather than letting it grow and opening those spaces for conversations and communication, and for developing their own ideas and their own standpoints. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, if I may. Hi, everyone, again. This is Nilüfer. Francisca mentioned that we're going to come back to sustainability and communication, maybe. So I have a question here. I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that you are making a communication between mind and heart in your job, you know? And we all know about sustainability to some extent, but it's not like we are feeling it, and emotions are basic drivers of acting sustainable, because there are no external direct rewards that we are immediately receiving. So what art does is intrigue something inside us. In your experience, are there some triggers that are external, you know, something that you said or did, or some students did, that triggers someone's emotion towards becoming more sustainable? And other than that, I have one other question. Does it usually go beyond communication? You know, it's just a dialogue between two people, which becomes communication, whether it contains data or information or feelings. But do people actually after that become more sustainable, or raise awareness about sustainable, or do the same thing for others, or does it usually stay there? What was I able to ask my question?
Yes, I think I understand what you're asking. So I certainly don't have like a follow-up measure to see if the students have really acted upon what they learned during, you know, my class or through experiencing my art. I think with the art, it's really harder because less people see it. I think I probably do a better job of communicating sustainability issues through teaching, because I contact students that are there for reasons. Than through my art. It's a much smaller kind of group of people. I did do a survey at the end of the first time I taught the course 2 years ago, just to get student feedback on the ways that I was teaching and everything. And I definitely had students that their awareness of the issues was raised, first of all. I don't know that they're going to change their, you know, different practices, but they were aware of so many more things than they had been previously. So I'd like to think that in 10 or 15 years from now, that there will be a translation of what they learned and saw in the way that maybe they live their lives. I think the biggest thing that students learned was about they kept saying in the beginning, like, I don't understand what art has to do with climate change, or what art has to do with communicating ideas around climate change. And I think in the end that the big takeaway from the class was really understanding what that means. And as you so eloquently put it, it is that emotional construct. It is that emotional connection that is a different, it's communication for sure, but it's a different kind of communication that many people are used to. And I think one of the sculptures that the students looked at, not sure if you all are aware or saw it, and I'm probably going to murder his name, Olafur Eliasson. Am I close on that pronunciation? He took the ice and put it outside of the Tate Modern and allowed it to melt, so people could just experience it firsthand. In my conversation with students, we did talk about how sustainable that was, taking pieces of glaciers and transporting them. But it did allow people to experience upfront that a very active loss that I think was very effective.
May I just ask a tiny more question? We average people as not artist people, you know, we are not, I am not an artist, unfortunately. How can we add this art into our lives, you know, not as professionals, you know, as normal people? How can I use art in, or create art even, in order to create that feeling or emotion for myself and for people around me?
That's a good question. I think, you know, as an artist, I'm motivated by my own internal emotions to make things. And a lot of, like, I am not, there's a lot of artists that are very focused on communicating a certain thing about climate change or the environment. And that's actually not me. My work is really, if I didn't make it, I think I'd be crazy. Like, it's really about keeping me and the way I think about things and feel about things, keeping me like kind of level. And I need to see the stuff, like I think these things and feel these things and make these things. And then I walk away and do something else. And I'm like, wait, did I really feel that? And then I'll go back in the studio and I'll see it there on the wall or on the table. And I'm like, yes, that's what so for me, I don't know if that made any sense at all to you. It's like, I have a place, a need to make. I have a need to express, and it's for me. You know, I'm putting out there, you know, a very internal thing. So I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to have I'm not trying to talk to you about anything. I'm talking to myself. And then I'll share that conversation with you at a later time. So if you have a need to make, you should definitely be making things, even if it's just little sketches in a sketchbook.
Yeah, that's amazing. Maybe one more question, Thomas?
I was just because you said it's personal. And at the beginning, you said it's about the Anthropocene when you work, and then it's a conversation from upfront, because that's always connected to everything. So it's not that personal, maybe, as it might seem at first sight. Or is it? So it is political from the beginning. If you say it's about the Anthropocene, then it's political.
Yeah. And so what I failed to mention that is that I also often work collaboratively. So and that's not personal. It can be about coming from personal areas, but that's definitely having a conversation with somebody else. And I really enjoy that. And so I work with biologists, environmentalists, other artists, photographers, musicians, dancers, all different kinds of people. And so most of my work is about the idea of juxtaposition. And so it's me with my own ideas, but then it's me juxtaposing those ideas against somebody else's ideas and allowing their ideas into my headspace that pushes me in so many directions. And then I got to bring it back home again.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thanks so much everyone else who was here today, joined us for this conversation. Yeah, I can only repeat that was a very delightful conversation. I think everyone took like a lot of things out of that, and I'm happy to join any follow-up conversations that grow out of this. And thanks to you, Yvonne.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all of your questions too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good day and good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.